another edition of the Mindset Game podcast, and I'm your host, James Roberts. Before we get started with this week's show, first off, let me take this opportunity to welcome back the regular listeners. And if this is your first time listening to the show, I hope you enjoy this episode and decide to subscribe to the show. And on today's show, I've got Will Boyd. Will is in orthopedic manual therapy, and is the co-host of Know Your Body. So welcome to the show, Will.
Hey, thanks for having me on, James. I really appreciate it.
Before we delve into today's topic, Will, can you talk to us about how you got into orthopedic therapy in the first place?
Sure. So I'm a physiotherapist by trade. I went to school here in the U.S. for here it's a Doctor of Physical Therapy program. I was able to complete that and had an interest in outpatient orthopedics, which includes things like manual therapy. I think oftentimes that can be confusing. It just means we do things with our hands, and we help treat people with our hands. And so that's what I got into. I was going to go to law school, decided I pictured myself sitting for way too long and decided I needed to figure a different career path. And so I started Googling, what should I do with my life? What should I do with my career? You know, the typical way anyone figures out what they should be in life, by Googling and asking Google what they should do. And Google wasn't wrong. It led me down the medical world and recommended physiotherapy. And since then, I've been practicing here in the U.S. for the past 6 months, and it's been a blast. I'm a recent graduate, and it's exciting. It's a great field to be a part of.
And you're talking about you researched on Google. Could you probably associate that now in the modern era as somebody speaking to probably the likes of Siri? I can't think what the Amazon one's called.
Alexa.
Or something like, and doing something like that as opposed to actually typing it in on the computer now.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but that's probably true. And I could just picture Alexa or Siri right now saying, "Will, you should be a physiotherapist." And how easy would that have been? I wouldn't even have had to have read anything. I just could have had someone tell me what to do.
Well, it's probably it comes down to that convenience now that people want to do the least amount possible.
As a physiotherapist, I hate to say that I can completely understand if that's the reality, because it's hard work. Things it's hard to express to people that the true change comes from really hard work, as you know so well. With the fit amputee community, that change really takes determination and hard work, and unfortunately, there's no one quick fix or one simple solution always.
I'm sure you probably see it from your work base. Obviously, when I talk about we want that shortcut, but because people are becoming more sedentary and doing things like that, not moving about, you've probably seen probably a sharp increase of more patients because they're not as limber as the population once was.
Absolutely. No, you hit the nail on the head, James, and it's you're absolutely right. We live in a culture that's become very, very essentially what we often refer to as the pill society, and that there's got to be a pill or something I can just take that will fix the problem for me, rather than I am the source of the potential solution. So a lot of times what we struggle with is really we get to the heart of behavior change. How do you help someone come to a decision to change their behavior when you're faced with an opportunity to, let's say if you have pain, for example, you have the choice of taking a opioid or a pain limiting pill, or, hey, it's going to take 8 to 10 weeks, but I can probably help you get this pain to subside through just general movement and exercise, and allowing me to get my hands on you a little bit, doing some deep tissue massage stuff, helping move your joints a little bit. Which would you rather do? And one is obviously safer, the one that doesn't involve pharmaceuticals. But, sadly, given the choice, I think a lot of people would still choose, I'll just take the pill. That sounds a lot easier and I don't have to do as much work. And that's no indictment on people. That's how we are as a society. And so we have to, that's in our profession in particular, that's what we're facing, is how do we really help people understand that they can be the source of controlling their own pain, and you don't have to look to just a pill to lower your pain or reduce your symptoms. It's an interesting time. We definitely have seeing a lot of patients who have what we call self-induced diseases, something like type 2 diabetes, obesity, even sometimes like congestive heart failure, just due to poor sedentary lifestyle. And so that's what we're up against. And definitely we're seeing more and more people who are just wanting that quick solution. And that's the challenge that we face, is how do we help people understand it's going to take hard work. And some of them, I'm sure all too well, with people who want to change their fitness and their health. It's a lot of psychology beyond just physiology and programming.
But doesn't it come back to this kind of underlying issue, Will, that people obviously, like you were saying, want to take the easy route and have a pill, but does it come back to that notion of obviously they're going to go to the doctor to get prescriptions for whatever ailment they have? Does it come back to that element of the doctor says I need to take this, I got to trust what they're saying?
Yeah, we have a huge role to play as healthcare professionals, medical professionals. Absolutely. I think we oftentimes can forget about our authority, just based on our education, that people look at us, and I'm not a medical doctor. So, but especially a medical doctor, when you see a medical doctor and they tell you information, you take that seriously, because you just assume that they know, the more than anyone else on that topic, because that's their authority. It's sort of the same way if I went to, James, if I were to come to you and say, hey, I can't get my fitness under control, and you told me, well, it's due to X, Y, and Z, or X, Y, and Z, I'd say, yeah, okay, I believe you. You're the one who does this all the time. You're the one who is putting people through the motions. So I would believe it. I do think that we often forget that our words and our language are very important, and that we have a responsibility to really help someone truly understand what's going on with their body. Not just you need to do X, Y, and Z, but you need to, and even those words like that, we need to be talking. I personally believe we need to be talking in a way that's, here are options that you can choose, and put the power on to the patient or to the client, right? It's your choice. This isn't me dictating what you have to do, but rather saying, here are the options. I will, inform you in a way that one or two of these are better options, but it's ultimately your choice, and you have to be the root of change.
And to go on from that point, have you seen by how the way you speak influences your client base? If you said you must do this, as opposed to giving them the tools and the choice to pick what route they go down, what are the kind of success rates between the two?
Yeah, it's a great question. And 100% absolutely, our language matters and our words matter. I think if you have any interest in language and the power of language, just study marketing for a little bit, or advertising, right? It's essentially the science of how to use words and images to convince you to take an action. And that's what we do in any of our fields, just through the language that we use. So for me, it's important that we use language like, here's what seems to be going on to me. And I never try to come at someone with, I know exactly what's going on with you, because we can never understand what's going on. A human being is so dynamic, so complex, and there's so many layers to a person that as soon as you start to assume, I believe, as soon as you start to assume that you know what is going wrong or going awry with a patient or a client, immediately you're trying to take power, right? I know the solution. I know the answer. I'm the one who can help you. And I hate to say it, but I think it's a little bit of an ego trip on our part to say, we know exactly what, I'm the one with the solution, look to me. Even though we don't mean that, and that's not our intention, using language like that here's what's, even the phrase, here's what's going on. Here's what Here's what I think is the problem. Instead of using language, like, I want to tell you what I've been seeing, Mrs. Jones. It looks like X, Y, and Z, seems to be happening, although, we can't be 100% sure, and we really want to help you come to a decision about what you want to do. And here's some things that we do know can help. Generally getting up and just moving more is one of the best things someone can do for low back pain. Is that something that you think you would like to do more? Would you like to get up and move more? And so instead of saying you need to get up and move more and asking the question, is that something you would like to do, right? Instead of me giving the power or taking the power and saying you have to, asking, is that something you would like to? We're shifting power, right? Now the power is on them. You get to choose, right? It's your choice. You're the decision maker. And I tend to find, and I think science would, and I think you would find through researching studies that people respond much more to choice and more positively to having control and power than being dictated what to do. I often think of a little kid. When you tell a little kid, or let's just say even some adults, hey, you can't do this. What's the first thing they do?
The opposite.
They do that. But when you say, hey, you can do this, this, or this, let me just give you some information about this, this, and this. And obviously you phrase it in a way that two of those aren't really good options and one is, and you let them come to a decision, all of a sudden you feel so much more empowered to know that, hey, I'm the one who came to that decision. No one told me what I had to do. So, I'd be super curious from your side of things, working with clients, what you see in terms of language, because I think for me, it's absolutely critical that we use language as a key component of how we help people.
I think from my side of things, I've been very much, I think in the earlier part of my career, I've been, like you said, you must do this. I think it works, if we analyze it a little bit, maybe 50% of your population that you're working with will respond to that. The other half will be, like you've mentioned, they'll do the opposite or not put that into action at all. And you're kind of feeling like you're banging your head against a brick wall. Whereas with shifting my business onto the internet and speaking to people and probably engaging a little bit more like we're doing today, be it Skype, FaceTime, Zoom, and you getting to know the person, you can kind of see where their tendencies are, kind of look where they'll answer certain questions and kind of get a feel as, well, I can maybe speak to you this way, or I have to speak to you like we were saying, and give you choices, and you can then implement it. And I think I've had changed clients' behaviors that they've probably thought, oh, James, you got to teach me X, Y, and Z to get to my goal. And as we've progressed on, it's kind of shifted across and gone to the other one. They'll speak to me and say, oh, still have this goal in mind, but they'll give their red flags as to why something's not going right. So it's okay. I've not had to tell you anything. You've told me this is what's not going right at this particular moment. Okay, I can just say, well, you found the root cause. It doesn't really matter what the end goal is if we don't solve those two, which are a massive one, which was consistency, and I can't remember what the other one is off the top of my head. Obviously, a big one, consistency. It doesn't matter what you do or whatever goal it is. If you're not consistent with something, that's going to be the problem. But you've brought it up to me. I've not had to say, well, this is the problem off the bat. You've identified with it. So obviously that's your call to action as to, well, I need to put that back in check to progress on. And he messaged me last week, everything's going well again. So it kind of puts the ball in the client's court as to they've got or you give them the knowledge to be able to implement things, and be it if they at a different stage and then go into that, they can kind of identify kind of when it's not all rose, but then it's not going to be perfect all the time anyway. So it's kind of teaching people you can have a bad day and don't dwell on the fact that you've gone out and enjoyed yourself. It's like it could be one meal. I'd probably stretch to probably say don't go more than a day, and as long as you go that, as long as it doesn't escalate to a week and then beyond, you'll be fine. I think that comes back to that societal thing of demonizing, obviously, unhealthy food as bad and good food as good. Well, you put it into context, and I brought it up, I think, a number of times recently on the podcast, of it doesn't matter in the context of the thing, be it good or bad. You eat too much of one thing, it doesn't really matter. It's still food at the end of the day. If you're consuming more than you're expending, it doesn't matter if it's, what would be, lean cuts of meat, we'll say, or as opposed to chocolate. If you're going to consume exorbitant amounts, you're going to put weight on. So I think from the fitness industry side of things, and say the dieting companies, they probably manipulate the wording as to, like you're saying, for a marketing spot, this is going to help you lose weight. You must cut this out. But you need to look probably on reflection as to what is this doing to my body by taking a food group out, or demonize. It kind of twists the psyche to a certain extent, from my perspective, that you're saying you can't have this food is bad for you. Obviously, like you were saying, your analogy with a child or an adult, you tell them to do something, obviously they're going to do the opposite. Or if you're demonizing such a thing, well, they're going to feel bad on themselves if they do, what would I say, crack under pressure and have something. They're going to feel probably 10 times worse, as opposed to if you say, you probably teach their behavior as to any food on the table that you want to have or you enjoy, you can still have, just have it in smaller amounts or have it as a treat or something like that. Whereas I'm not demonizing it, so you're not going to feel bad when you do have it, if you get what I mean.
No, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's neat to hear it from your side of things, especially I think it's fascinating to hear, since you've transitioned to being more online, where I think it's fascinating. I think because, oftentimes we rely on this kind of face-to-face, being in person with someone, helping them change, and to see this new platform of being online, and really what you have is your language, right? You have your eyes, you can see through video, but for the most part, it's how you talk to that person, I imagine.
I think it comes back to that personal connection. I don't think it really matters to some extent that it be face-to-face, or on video, because you still like that interaction face-to-face. Obviously, if we put it in your field, obviously you can't do that because your job is very hands-on. I don't know. I think from probably maybe a technical standpoint, it's probably more difficult with it being online, because you can't obviously change, say, postural things, because you're not generally in the room with them. So you've got to, at some extent, I think maybe if they're a more advanced individual, they probably can identify with, this movement is not quite right, or probably a good one for people to look at. And probably a tip here is, obviously, if you're not feeling confident with your posture or with a new exercise, probably to look and use a mirror as a guide. That's probably the greatest tool you're probably going to have to kind of see how your body is operating. And if I say, or if we use the squat, for example, you need to be in the XYZ position, it's not the end of the world if you've got a different biological pattern that you follow. Obviously, everybody's physical attributes are different, so they're going to get into a different position. I might say you need to be in this position, but it doesn't always, that won't always be, that's probably like textbook way of looking at things. You need to be in these positions on on each stage of the exercise, but it's one I brought up with Garbine is looking at you need to look at how your pattern of movement works and go from there, and then look to make those small incremental changes, as opposed to saying, well, this is what it says in a book. I've got to follow it letter of the law, whereas that doesn't always work. You could have longer legs, longer torso, it would be another one, and you're not going to get in the same position as with me. I've got long levers and small torso. I'm going to be in a different position. So it's probably looking at those. Obviously, I brought up the tip of the mirror. The other one will probably be video in it, and you can kind of get that analytical view of yourself. It's probably a good one for people that don't like positive criticism. Oh, you're not doing this correctly, Joe. Whereas if you video yourself, you can't argue against it. That's what it said. That's what it should show, and that's what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. I think you're right. I mean, I think we're actually finding more and more too in our field in physiotherapy, trying to shift more to an online platform in a lot of places, because I think that essentially what you're doing and through strength and conditioning principles, aerobic capacity principles, I still think are the best therapeutic interventions that, and when I say that, I mean, that's how we describe our treatments, or how we would help a patient is described through, for example, an intervention, but it essentially means how we would help someone, what we would offer them. And I still think that therapeutic exercise in the sense of strength and conditioning principles and cardiovascular endurance aerobic conditioning principles are the staple of helping someone become the best functioning person out there. And I'm a huge believer that it doesn't matter your age, you are an athlete. As long as you are having to maneuver in this environment called Earth, you are an athlete, and you have to move in your environment. You have to get around. That could be, even if that means that you're 95 and you're bedbound, you still have to find ways to move and interact with the world. And so you are, in my mind, that's the definition of an athlete. Now, don't get me wrong, there are performance athletes that are, do some incredible feats, but I would argue that watching, for example, my 95-year-old patient who just had a stroke stand up with a little bit of help that's an athletic movement. That takes a ton of power, a ton of strength. I think that where you're going and moving on to that, essentially what I was going to say with that is that those principles can be transferred to an online platform like what you've got going on with Fit Amputee. And so in your training principles. So I think, or your training program, I think we're in a world where we can use this technology to really help spread the message that, we have to get people moving. We have to move more. We have to get out of this position of hunched over on a computer 7 to 8, 10 hours a day. I'm a big believer that the biggest way out of this sort of cultural shift that we've made over the past 50, 60 years of becoming more sedentary, like we have to just reverse it. We have to move. We have to get up and move.
Well, probably a good analogy for that one, Will, is probably treating the body as a well-oiled machine.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people, what's tough, James, is I think a lot of people, for example, that I meet don't view themselves as having a well-oiled machine. They view themselves as having a more of a 10-man type of body, and that the oils kind of run dry, and some strict, very straightforward. If anyone's had arthritis or had, cartilage wear down, they, often people think I feel stiff and I feel like I just don't have the juice anymore that I used to. And we know that sometimes that can be true. So you have this, what's called synovial fluid between your joints. And what's interesting is that people who have arthritis tend to think that not moving is the best thing. But actually, the only way that we produce more of the synovial fluid is through movement. The body responds to the stress of movement, and it's forced to need to produce more. So by becoming sedentary, you actually make the issue worse. And so that's what we're finding, that it's the body is meant to be a well-oiled machine, even though some people might not feel that way. we do know that some of the best treatments for low back pain, obviously depending on someone's specific condition, but for the majority of chronic low back pain, movement is one of the best treatments out there. Walking more, moving side to side, just getting your body out of one position is one of the best things we can do. And so I think you hit the nail on the head. The body is meant to be a well-oiled machine, and it always can be, but it takes sort of this, it takes a mental shift to kind of get back to that. And we start viewing people as athletes again. It doesn't matter what age, what your, let's say your health status is, you have to be able to move. And that's just a huge component of life. And so that's what we're hoping to be able to do, I think, with both of our fields, both of our professions, is get people able to become better athletes just to maneuver in this world, in our environment. It's not always about, can I run the fastest? Can I jump the highest? But can I do the things that matter? Like if I've got to go up that big curb to get to the grocery store, can I do that? And we often think we take it for granted, but that's an athletic movement. You've got to be able to get your foot up, your leg up. You've got to be able to however you're going to do it. If you've got to, if you've got to get maybe you have to crawl up. I have a lot of patients who crawl up the stairs at night, and that's how they get upstairs, just because they feel too weak to go with their legs. And so, I kind of went away from the original question there, James. I just got me thinking about how I just wish we would view people more as athletes, even regardless of what age they're at.
Well, that kind of point you ended with there, with people clawing up the stairs. Well, I'll use myself as the example. You couldn't just define that as an able-bodied person. If I don't have my prosthetic leg on, I won't term it crawling, but it's a form of, we could say, I'm an animalistic type of walking to go up the stairs. I probably do it because it's quicker. I'm using 3 limbs as opposed to hopping up with one, and I'm not going to make as much noise going upstairs, so I won't wake up the household. So I wouldn't define it just to the able-bodied population. And
right.
Obviously, like you were saying, if that's the only way you can get up the stairs, be it, we'll term it safely, and there's nothing wrong with doing it that way. It's probably the more efficient way of getting around. But to come back to the point that you raised about that Tin Man approach, or the Tin Man way people feel, would it not come down to teaching them to know their bodies and be able to, as yourself and I know within the health industry, trigger points? Would it be good for them to know if they are slightly tight, if they can kind of pinpoint, well, this is where it's the kind of problem is arising?
Yeah, no. I think that the more we go, I'm a big believer that the more we go looking for finding quote unquote problems or deficiencies or, limiting factors like tightness, the more we sort of give someone a reason to think that's the issue, which is sometimes that is the case. I think a lot of times people will tend to feel better just moving more. I mean, really, I think increasing their activity level, so increasing the intensity. So we think about something like tightness, right? Tightness is a sensation. It's actually just a perceived sensation of how far a muscle spindle can go. And so a muscle spindle just means that you have a sensor within every muscle fiber that sends a signal to your brain. Have I gone too far? Have I stretched too far? Have I pulled too far? So the sense of tightness isn't always a sense that someone is tight. It's actually that they perceive to only have a certain limitation when they're stretching or when they're moving. And so telling someone that they're tight, I think, can lead someone to focus on something like that. And I know that's one specific example, but we often help. I think when we say things like that, we can lead someone to believe, oh, well, if I just am not tight in my hip, I'll be back to where I was 20 years ago. And that might not be the case, right? So we have to talk about, it could be a limiting factor. Let's say someone has a tight calf, right? I think we've all probably experienced tight calves at some point in our life, or a tight low back. Your back seizes up or tenses up. And we have to help someone say, hey, you're not tight because your muscles are in this fixed, tightened position, right? It's just, that's what they've gotten used to. And now they detect that's your normal position. That's your normal length. We need to reteach the body, what is its normal length? What can it get to? What can it do? So I think something like trigger points are great, and they can definitely help. I think that, unfortunately, I think as patients, being a patient myself, having had, some ankle sprains and things like that in the past, and gone to see a physical therapist before, we want to think that's the answer. Yeah, just do that one thing and I'll be back and be good, instead of, right, it's this process of growth and regrowing and re-educating that takes weeks. We know that, for example, you can't even strengthen a muscle in terms of changing size of muscle until at least 6 to 8 weeks. Up until that point, it's just neurological changes. So it's just your brain being able to tell that muscle to activate quicker. So it takes time. It takes a process. And so, I think something like trigger point can be great, especially someone who feels tight. However, I always am nervous to say that, like, that's the answer, the solution to someone feeling the way they want to feel, because ultimately it's a small change. If you go back to living the life that you've been living before and going back to the same habits, sitting in the same posture 8 to 10 hours a day, me doing 20 to 30 minutes of trigger point massage will help you probably for the next 2-3 hours. After that, if you go back to the way you're living, I would feel pretty confident betting that within the next day or two, it's going to go back to how it was.
I think that's probably a good explanation as to why that it probably will work for some people. I think probably more the advanced population maybe work a little bit better. Obviously, I've kind of worked alongside the physiotherapist type work, be it from the athlete perspective. I've kind of learnt to know my body from the sports side of things, and then when now I've retired from that, I still kind of know how my body works, so I can kind of I will be very much with my physiotherapist say, well, I'll be very much more specific because I know the lingo, as I won't generalize and say people say, oh, I've got back pain. I can kind of say, well, I think it's this muscle, and kind of say it's the myofascial chain of events that's actually causing it. And I think maybe from somebody within your field, it maybe helps a little bit more because I'm being a bit more subjective, and I think I'm going into a little bit more depth. I have to think, well, I think it's a problem in this, and it kind of maybe gives you a bit more to go with in terms of how you go about treating me. Whereas if I said, I think it's hurting here, it's not very specific, and it could be, well, not want to say you'd be way off, but you might be spending more time as though this isn't actually tight, as you said. It's quite normal, but then the actual problem is somewhere else. And you could, I don't want to say wasting time, but you're not getting to the root cause off the bat. But then that's quite difficult, like you were saying early on. It's quite a difficult one to find out what's the actual root cause of tightness.
Yeah, no, you make a great point, James, and honestly, I think it again goes back to recognizing that we're dealing with a human being, and that even if I were to find specific measurements, let's say, or we did data on whether your right arm or your left arm could push harder. Ultimately, to me, that doesn't mean anything if we can't have you actually get back to doing what you want to do. Numbers are great. I think they're vital, and we need to keep tracking them. But ultimately, if I can get your right arm as strong as your left arm and you still can't reach over your head to get that cup of coffee, what good has it done me that I've made your right arm stronger when you can't complete the task that you want to complete? But we do know that what is really, really important is that whatever the patient or client expects will help them get better often is what will get the patient better. And this is why I'm a huge believer in that. Health and wellness is very much a psychology world as it is physiology, in the sense that, for example, if you go see a physiotherapist, so here in the States, and I don't know for sure in England, but here in the UK, but here in the States, physiotherapists in most states can do what we call manipulation, or essentially cracking your back, or however you want to call that. So we are capable of doing what a chiropractor does. And if you go in and you think that that's what's going to help your back pain, we've found through studies that if I say, no, you don't need that, and I do 4 other things that I think are best for you, you're more likely going to say that you still don't feel good than if I did the one thing that you think that is going to help you, you will feel better. Like, we've done studies and it shows. So your beliefs are absolutely critical to your own health and understanding your body. So if you feel like, hey, I need that trigger point massage in my back or my neck, right? And there's this muscle right here. I need that trigger point. And if I tell you, James, no, you don't. And if I don't take that into consideration, odds are you're not going to feel that much better. Maybe, but we know that there's a much better chance that you will report feeling better if we provide you what you expect will help you feel better.
On to kind of put this in context for the listeners, Will and I were discussing this, probably a couple of days ago on Facebook, about the psychosomatic element of physiotherapy, and kind of what the question I asked you over Facebook is what was your take on cupping and gua sha? And obviously you were saying, like you just said, it's very much, if you believe it's going to work, it probably will.
Yeah, and so we have the evidence still isn't super strong in terms of research on cupping. I don't know about the research, but we do know that there's been heavily researched your beliefs and expectations, essentially the patient or client expectations. So if you expect something is going to help you get better, just playing into that helps. And so a lot of what manual therapy is, and I'm by no means an expert, and it's not something I've studied, beyond my coursework. I haven't been, writing research myself on it or studying it as a researcher. But we do know that a lot of manual therapy, in the sense that when I get my hands on you, the power of touch very much has physiological changes in that, it can increase blood flow with massage. It can reduce sort of that sensory tension, right? Sensation tension that we talk about, where if you've ever met someone really tense and you just touch them, they can jump quickly, and it just jumps the nervous system, right? The sympathetic nervous system, which is our flight system, like get out of there, fight or flight system, get out. And we can help detrain that and just calm someone's system down through our hands, which is a very powerful tool. Ultimately, like if James, for example, if you've got a shoulder issue and I get my hands on you, more than likely me just using my hands is not going to help your shoulder. But when we use it as a tool to build trust with the patient, to help lower your nervous system, to help calm you down, it's very, very powerful. And so something like cupping, something like gua sha, can be very powerful in the way of just reducing sort of your nervous system, and then also feeding into your expectation, right? If I were to say, I play better, I only play my best when I play rugby, when I drink a Gatorade before the game, right? Like, I don't think there's any evidence that's going to say you need to drink a Gatorade before your game to play your best, right? In fact, there's probably some argument like you shouldn't have that much sugar in you right before you play a game. But if you believe it, you will probably play better if you have that Gatorade, because it's in your mental psyche, it's in your expectation. And so things like cupping, even though we don't have the best evidence, It's a useful tool, and I always express that to people, that it's just a tool. It's a part of a bigger process, right? If you, for example, James, if you decided the next 10 years you aren't going to move more than 2 minutes a day at all, and I said, hey, we're going to do cupping, James, I'm not going to restore your ability to move better, right? You still have to put in the hard work. You still have to be able to move. You have to be able to do the exercise. You have to be able to use your body for what it was meant for. And that's movement. Like, it was designed. It's the coolest machine that's ever been invented or created, or whatever you believe, that to move. It has one goal, and that's to move. And to protect this thing called our brain that helps us think, sometimes too much, but to help us think. And so expectations are huge. What you expect will help you. We have to take into account. So something like cupping, something like gua sha, I would never tell a patient or client, this is the answer to your shoulder pain, or this is the answer to you being tired. But what I would say is this could help if we use it in conjunction with other things like proper exercise and, getting you stronger in certain ranges of motion. And so that's why things like cupping are powerful, and they can be useful. I would just never say that it's the one solution to a problem.
I think, like you were saying, I would dread to think what it'd be like if I didn't move for only 2 minutes over the next 10 years. I'd probably be massively rigid.
Do you think cupping would help you at that point?
No, from a therapy point of view, I don't think much would work at all, because you'd be that's everything. Well, like you were saying, the synovial fluid wouldn't be as prominent in your limbs. You'd probably be a right mess, and it probably would take a lot of sessions just to get you back to where you were probably 10 years prior, let alone anything more than that.
So we have to think about too that, the human body has been able to survive for thousands of years and been able to fix itself, that we often underestimate how powerful the body is at healing itself. It's a tool designed to heal itself. I think a lot of times, because we've as human beings in our species, we've been faced with war and work, right? And these ideas that I have to be somewhere at a certain time. It used to be you would get up and hunt when animals were out. And then when they weren't, why would you go do something else when you could conserve energy and wait until it's time to go hunt again? But now it's, James, it's 5 a.m. on a Tuesday. You have to be at this place at this time so I can give you money and you can keep living your life. Well, if you're going to be somewhere from 5 a.m. to, let's say, if you're lucky, 2 p.m., probably more likely 3, 4, 5 p.m., you're essentially telling someone to stay in a certain position for 8, 9, 10, 12 hours a day. The body wasn't designed to do that. And so that's why we're bringing in other fields in a lot of ways. That's why we're bringing in physiotherapists, trainers, chiropractors, nutritionists, because we've eliminated that need to move, right? To change positions. A lot of low back pain could be solved by just changing positions frequently. Instead of just, I always tell people this, there's no such thing as good posture. Posture is not it's a difficult thing to explain to someone, but posture is not a sedentary, stable position. There's no such thing as a good posture. The best posture is one that's constantly changing. And so that's what good posture is, because your muscles are constantly activated, even though they feel like they're off. For me to sit up right now, James, for you to be sitting up right now and talking to each other, my trunk muscles are working, my chest muscles are working, my arm muscles are working, my back is certainly working. And so I need to be activating and changing the positions of those muscles at all times. So that way there's this balance of expectation of stress. Whereas if I just say, you could tell someone, sit up straight, And I guarantee you, if someone sat up straight for 14 hours a day, they'd still have back pain, even though someone would say, you have great posture. And I'd say, it doesn't matter because you're only staying in one position. And the body was designed to do one thing, not stay in one position.
But there's probably like in the office environment, obviously there's been inventions of the chairs for better posture and things like that. But obviously how you say it and how I've reflected on what you just said, obviously it would be better to maybe even scrap that idea and just to get up. I think I was reading, if you get up and move position wise, was every hour for at least 5 to 10 minutes, you'd help with your posture.
Yeah, and I think more than posture, you'd help fight off things like low back pain or knee pain, because you're telling your body that it has to move, and your body responds to one thing, and that's stress. And so stress, not just like a psychological stress, but actual physical stress on the body. So as someone who does online training, personal training, James, and coaching, you don't grow by lifting the same weight over and over and over and over and over again, right? At some point, you have to put more on to grow, to become stronger, to get to move better. And so we have to do the same thing, right? If I tell my body, I mean, I picture sometimes like this avatar of my body over here on the side, and if I were to just say, just don't do anything for 12 hours, and then after 12 hours, I go, hey, it's time to like perform. You're like, I'm tired, dude. I've just been sitting here for 12 hours. Like, I don't have the energy. I haven't done anything. So we have to find ways to, and I'm really fascinated by that. It's something that I would ultimately love to get into, is instead of trying to help people just outside of work, how can we infiltrate into workplaces and help people where they're going to be? They have to be, people have to be at work. Whether or not I believe that internally at this point in society, people have to be at work. And, why aren't we getting to where people are 8, 9, 10 hours a day? Because that's where we can make a difference, I think. I think that's where we can really, for example, with physiotherapy or athletic training or personal trainers, getting into a workplace environment and saying, look, your employees are at a high risk of low back pain because all they do is sit all day, and there's no incentive to get up and move. In fact, if anything, there's probably more incentive to stay sitting to try to pump out more work. So maybe you look better to your employer, or you get a bonus or something. So how do we incentivize movement? Because ultimately, one of the biggest costs, in fact, in the US, for example, the number one reason for missed work days is musculoskeletal pain. So why do people have musculoskeletal pain? Well, it's because people are sitting all day. Your back hurts, your neck hurts. You're in this hunched over position. And so, want to get to employers directly and say, look, people are missing, and what missed days come down to is missed productivity for the employer side and a lack of revenue that could have been generated that day. And so that's where I think we really have an opportunity in our fields. I think you and I and anyone else in the health kind of world can really have a unique niche in getting into those offices and places of employment and saying, hey, your employees are here for 8, 9, 10 hours a day. Let me help them stay healthy so you don't have to pay them for missed days off because they have back pain or neck pain. And I think if we do that too, you hit a place where someone's going to be every day, 5 days a week. You want to talk about consistency. That is a huge place where you could make consistent changes because people have to be there. People don't have to show up to the gym. People don't have to show up to the online Skype calls with James, right? They have the choice of not doing that. Most people don't have a choice when it comes to going to work. And so why don't we meet them there? And I don't have the answers. I wish I did. I just think that that's where we can really make an impact. So I hope that we can do that.
And Will, if I move it on to the next segment of the show and say, how did your podcast come about?
Yeah, so the Nobody's podcast kind of came from a friend and I were in physiotherapy school, and we just felt like so in physiotherapy school you have to do internships or we call them clinical rotations, where you essentially go and you practice under a supervisor or someone, an experienced physiotherapist, and you learn from them. It's sort of like an apprenticeship, but you do multiple of them in different settings. And I constantly found myself just explaining to someone patients would be like, I don't really understand what diabetes is. And in the US, at least, physiotherapists tend to get anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour with the patient, which if the UK is anything like the US, if you got to see your medical doctor for a half an hour, you would think that some bomb went off and everyone was not, for some reason people didn't show up today, because I can't think of the last time I've seen my medical doctor for more than 10 minutes at a time, and they're on to the next person and they bring in an assistant or whoever the nurse. So we would have the time, we have the luxury of having time with patients. And so I found myself explaining, what does, just simple things. What is hypertension? What does it really mean? And I found that if I said things in scientific words, people would look at me like, wow, you seem really smart, but I have no idea what you're saying. This is crazy, but they wouldn't want to say it because they just wouldn't want to be rude and be like, yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay. Something about glycemia and, lipids. And they were just like, this guy seems smart, but he's not helping me at all. And so once I started using analogies, like with simple things like, congestive heart failure, right? So really what that is you have valves in your heart. You have 4 valves in your heart. And sometimes those valves become like undone, or they're not as tight as they were before. And so you can get a little bit of leaking. And then that's what leads to sort of a backflow and a plugging. And that's why sometimes you start to see pooling in your legs. If you've ever seen someone with congestive heart failure, they often have really swollen legs. And so once I started using analogies, I just noticed people really resonated with that. And I thought, well, why don't we try to talk about that? What if we talk about that? And as a student, I didn't feel like I was an expert. So I thought, what if we bring on experts who are really good at telling these things like stories? And so that's been our entire mission with the Nobody's podcast, is to bring on experts in the healthcare world, and not even just healthcare, but in life, that are doing things that have a really great way of putting things into story form or analogy form to understand things like pain. I think oftentimes pain right now is such a strange topic, in that we often think that pain comes from the physical site where we hurt ourselves, like my knee, right? Like if I bang my knee, my pain is in my knee. Well, for a certain period of time it is, but really after a while it becomes a cortical change in your brain. So you have what we just call your cortex, but your brain actually starts to change. The wiring changes, and now your perceived threat just jumps up through the roof. And so I don't even have to give you much of a stimulus to anywhere near your knee, and all of a sudden your knee pain can be 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10. And that has very little to do with actual damage to your knee. It's that your brain has now perceived a threat saying, I should be in pain. This should be painful. And so breaking that down into an analogy, right, of here's like an overactive fire alarm, right? It's like if you get anywhere near a fire alarm, it goes off, even though there's no fire. So, and doing that. And so that's where all that started. And we've been really lucky. I'm not sure how we've had the success we've had, but it's been a great ride. And we are just so fortunate to meet great people, and hopefully we'll be having you on soon, and we can chat about your experiences, because I think it's we just need more people who can help people really understand things, because the knowledge, the science is great. It's wonderful. But if you don't know what it means or how to use it and how to interpret it yourself, ultimately it doesn't do a lot of good. And going back to that control and power, if I'm the only one with the knowledge and ability to understand something, I'm kind of feeding my ego as I'm the one who's smart. I have the answers. I know the education. And I just am a big believer that the patient or the client needs that education as well. We just have to put it in different terms, in language that they're more used to. And I think ultimately we do it ourselves, right? I didn't get through graduate school or this doctor program being like, oh yes, totally understand the glucose levels there. Yeah. I know all this, the CPR counts of some creatine level. Like, no, I had to tell myself stories of what those things meant. Like I had to create stories of, creatine's like, it's kind of like this Energizer bunny thing going on. Yeah, if we put it in there and then you get all this stuff. And that's how most people's brains work. We all have to create stories to help us understand these complex ideas. So that's what the podcast came out of. If anyone feels like that's something they would enjoy, after you listen to James's podcast, of course, first, feel free to check out the Nobody's podcast.
But I think that one you bring up with the knee pain and the associated what comes with it, I think it's kind of a psychosomatic way your brain is obviously going into fight or flight mode. Obviously, if you're going anywhere near that, it's sore. I think what the tendencies the muscles do is, obviously, if something is hurt, another one is going to become tight as a result to also what I want, protect it in a way.
So it can be. I think oftentimes, so it's a matter of a couple of things. So I think a lot of it comes down to timing. So actual tissue damage can vary in how long it lasts. But let's say, and by tissue damage, I mean your muscle, your bone, any type of sort of living element within your body. For a lot of it can be considered a tissue. But let's just say that timing. So typically most tissue injuries, and by that I mean muscle, will be able to heal within 6 to 8 weeks if it's not severe. And so once we get to the point that we're past that, like 6 to 8 weeks, and someone's still saying, I've got 8 out of 10 pain, that's kind of shifted in that those muscles around it may want to protect it. And again, but that doesn't mean that it's not ready to move, right? It's still ready to move at that point. It's just now the brain is actually taken over. And the brain saying, I sense a threat. I sense that we should be in pain, when in reality, there's no actual tissue damage at this point. So the brain is now taken over and said, we should be feeling pain. We should be feeling pain. We should be feeling pain. It's like this just constant cycle going on. And so that's where we have to relax the muscles around that area. We have to relax that muscle itself and say, look, you're not in pain. We just have to, it's like talking to a little kid of being like, it's okay to jump in the pool. It's okay. Like, I'm here. You have floaties on. I don't know in the UK if you call them floaties on your arms, you get the puffed up things that help you float, and be like, it's okay to move again. And it's definitely okay. Your brain is just telling you that it's not. So it's tough. Yes, the muscles around it can protect. And by protect, they just become overactive and they want to take on the force that normally that muscle would take on. But again, I think it's something that's very personal and very person dependent on how responsive they are to pain, for example.
And in terms of like you were saying, it's very much, how would you break down that barrier really? Because once you've got it fixated in your mind that something's not right, it's quite difficult to actually get back to normal. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, that's where I think language is important. And that's why I think the power of story is so important and so useful, in that people can relate to stories and people can relate to someone who talks to them at their level. One of the best things I ever learned when I was a teacher was that you should, if you're going to have a serious talk with a kid, and I taught first grade in elementary school, primary school, was to get on your knee and talk to the kid or child at eye level. I didn't really understand it at first. And then I started trying it and I noticed kids would listen and they would be much more involved. And I learned really quickly that you break that barrier of this, I'm an authority, you're not, I'm superior, you're not. You break that chasm, of who's right, who's wrong. And when you approach someone, and language can be that way as well, right? If I start talking in pure scientific terms and you haven't studied science, automatically there's this gap between us of, oh, I know so much more than you do, right? Or I'm so much smarter than you are. And ultimately, that doesn't really help anyone if we can't connect at some level. And so I'm a big believer that we have to use our language and talking at a diction level of being able to talk to someone that we both can understand each other And that's where I think real change can happen. So that's how we break down fear. That's how we break down concepts of, I can't do this, or I don't think I should do that. And we start using stories and you start using analogies, people resonate with that. It's the same way we resonate with, for example, David and Goliath, right? And an underdog story that goes back long periods of time. And, whether you're religious or not, you can relate to that, right? You don't have to say, well, you're the small guy, there's the big guy, right? You just say David and Goliath and you understand, oh, yes, I get it. One's sort of has no chance, one should win, but the one with no chance wins. And so just breaking things into stories, I think, is incredibly, incredibly powerful. And I think that's our best way at helping. I think it's one of our tools that we can use to help people change.
I think that's a good analogy to use. It's like to storytell to help people. And the last question, Will, before we wrap up the show, is if you had to summarize this entire episode into one sentence, what would that be?
If I had to summarize, I would say your body is incredibly powerful. You are an athlete regardless of any age. And if there's one thing that we all can benefit from in life, is keep moving. Move, 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 move. I think that was technically like 6 sentences if you put a full stop after every move. But
I think that's probably...
Put a comma. We'll use commas.
It's probably the something to live by, and that obviously we should be more active and getting about. Obviously, that's what we were built for. So, once again, Will, thanks for coming on the Mindset Game podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, James. It's been an honor. I hope there were some pearls in there that were mixed in with a lot of rambling.
And before I forget, I would really appreciate it if you would be so kind as to leave a short written review, as it helps to get the podcast more notoriety and it would be more visible in future to others, and thus helping more people, which my guests and I are all about. Once again, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time for another episode of the Mindset Game podcast.